Hi again. In this video, I'm going to go through a minimal working example of how to get Javadoc running on your machine and how you can view the HTML files that are produced from Javadoc. I'm going to go through how to set up Javadoc comment blocks for driver classes, methods, and fields. And I'll go through a few common flags that you can use for the Javadoc command. We'll do this via command line, and we'll do this via IntelliJ. So two different ways to generate your Javadoc documentation HTML files. So let's create a new project. I'll call this Javadoc Fun. Now, I'm going to need some classes in order to document them. So I'm going to real quickly code up a very trivial point class and a very trivial point tester class. Okay. What I'm using for point and point tester doesn't really matter. The focus is on Javadoc. So I'll code this up pretty fast. So my point class is really simple. It's going to represent a point in 2D space. So it's going to have two private fields, an X and a Y. It's going to have two constructors. One's going to be an explicit value constructor and one's going to be a default value constructor. I'll initialize a default point to the origin. Next, it's going to have some getters and setters for my X and Y. And lastly, it's going to override toString that's inherited from the object class. And I'll just leave the default toString for now. All right, so here's a really simple point class. Now I need a point tester that's going to have a main method. All right, so all point tester is going to do is make a point and print it out. Not too exciting, but it gives us a very small example that we can use for Javadoc. All right, so far so good. All right, so I'm in point tester and I'm at the top of the class. So I want to emphasize that if you have any import statements, they still need to be at the top. And then right before your class or your method or your field or your constructor that you're about to document, that's where you put something called a Javadoc block comment. So I'm going to make one real quick and then I'll take some notes about what is Javadoc. All right, so this is a Javadoc block comment. It looks really similar to your standard C-style block comments with two differences. The first is the first line has two asterisks on it or two stars on it instead of one. This is especially important because this is what Javadoc looks for. Javadoc looks for block comments with these two stars on the first line instead of just one star. If it's just one star, that's not a Javadoc comment, and Javadoc is not going to parse through and use that comment. Next, and this is really nice in IntelliJ and other IDEs, I'll just press enter. Any subsequent lines in the block comment are, they start with an asterisk and a space. So that way all the text lines up really nicely. You can see that there. All right, so that's what a Javadoc comment looks like. Now, what is Javadoc? So Javadoc is a tool for generating documentation from your source code. So what it generates is a bunch of HTML files that together create a website. So the analogy that I like to give for Javadoc is like Java-C, but for your comments. So just to recap, Java-C is the Java compiler, and it takes your source code and it ignores the comments and it parses the source code and makes sure that it adheres to Java syntax and Java grammar rules, right? And it produces class files, which are then executed by Java. Well, Javadoc it looks a little bit at your source code, but it mostly looks at the comments that Java-C ignores, and it parses those comments and takes those comments and produces an output, just like Java-C, but instead of .class files, Javadoc produces .html files. And HTML files are just used to make web pages. All right, so let's take a look at what does Javadoc documentation, websites, and web pages look like. All right, so one website that you can take a look at that uses Javadoc to generate its HTML files is the documentation for Java. So if I Google Oracle Java API, the first thing that comes back is the Oracle documentation for the Java application programming interface specification. So this is what Javadoc looks like. This is made using Javadoc. So on the left side, you can see some packages and some classes, and you can get some details on the packages. You can come up and look at, let's do the index. The index and see an alphabetized list of all of the documented variables and classes and enums and types and everything in Java. This is pretty huge. Wow, this is just the A's. All right, so the purpose of this is not to overwhelm you, but really to show you what Javadoc looks like, or Javadoc documentation looks like. Okay, there's a bunch of HTML files here. Like, let's say I click on, let's do abstract action. Okay, this is an HTML file that's generated from Javadoc. What's really cool is we can generate documentation like this for our projects really quickly, and we don't have to touch any HTML in order to get Javadoc to work, which is really nice. So this is what we're going to produce for our little point tester and point class in our Javadoc Fun project. All right, so now that we know what it looks like, let's talk a little bit about how it's structured and how it works. All right, so we already know that Javadoc looks for these Javadoc comments that start with /**. All right, so a Javadoc comment has two parts, and the two parts are separated by a space. So part one, this is the description of whatever you're documenting. We're going to see this in action here shortly. And part two is the tag list. So the description is pretty much free-form English. You can sprinkle in some HTML tags if you want, but the tag list is very specific, and the tag list has to include valid Javadoc tags, and you'll get warnings and possibly errors when Javadoc processes your tag list if you've tried to use some things after your tags that aren't appropriate for those tags. And we're going to see that in action right now. All right, so here's our Javadoc comment for point tester, okay? Note that it's right above the definition for point tester class, okay? There's no, gap here. I'm not doing something else, some other comments or whatnot. It's right before. That's good practice. And what I see sometimes is people will put this at the top of the file, and then they'll put their import statements in here. Don't do that. It needs to be right before the class or whatever type, or whatever method, or whatever field that it is documenting. All right, so on the first line, I can put in something here like a description of point tester. So this is pretty free-form. I'm going to make this up as I go. Point tester tests the point class in point.java. Okay, pretty straightforward. If you only have one sentence and it's on the first line like this, this is going to be used to summarize the class. Any additional sentences will be in the detail for the class. Okay, and then here's that blank line, right? Separated by, well, I shouldn't say a space, I should say a new line. Here's that blank line right here, and now my tag list. So for a tester class like this, kind of the main entry point for the program, I might put something in here like author, version, and maybe an @C. So Oh, not book, excuse me, point. All right, so @author is the tag for defining the author of this file or this class, @version, the version of it. And @C is used to make a C also. So @C is kind of picky, and it wants to see, it wants to have references to actual identifiers and types in this package or in this namespace in scope. There's a lot of fancy things you can do with @C, but here I'm just going to reference point. All right, so this is a good time to talk about how to run Javadoc. I could have ran Javadoc without even putting in a Javadoc comment because it'll take a look at your code and be able to infer quite a bit about it. But now that we have one comment here, it'll be kind of nice to see how it plays out in our HTML files. All right, so how to run Javadoc. I'm going to go through two different ways to do this. The first is from command line, and the second is from IntelliJ, which is the IDE that I'm using here. All right, so from command line, you run the Javadoc command, then use the -D flag in order to specify the directory to put all of the HTML files in. So good practice is to call this doc. It works well with IntelliJ because we have like the src, the out. Those are all 3 letters. Doc is a nice shortened version, 3-letter shortened version of documentation. All right, -D, doc. And then I need to say what files, what Java source files I want Javadoc to document. So I'm going to do the source folder and all of the files in it. If you're on a Windows machine, instead of a /, this will need to be a \. All right, there's a few more flags that are commonly used with Javadoc. We'll add a few of them, but I'll refer you to the documentation for anything you need beyond this very simple crash course in Javadoc. But this is pretty straightforward what you need to get started with Javadoc. All right, so go ahead and open up a terminal or command prompt. You can use the one that's inside IntelliJ if you want. Down here in the bottom left, terminal. All right, so I'm going to do an ls and make sure that I'm in the right directory. It looks like I am. So here's the source folder, which as you can see I'm using as a relative path. So this is where I want to run my Javadoc command. So I'm going to run Javadoc -D doc, which is going to create a doc folder in the current working directory here, and source and all the files in it. Now remember, Javadoc is like a compiler, but a compiler for comments. So you can get warnings and you can get errors from Javadoc. It looks like I don't have any, which is nice. All right, so now if I come back up to my Project Explorer here, there's a new folder called doc. I mean, I can also do an ls and see it right here. All right, so if I expand doc, I'm going to see a bunch of HTML files and some JavaScript and styling sheets and things. Okay, don't be overwhelmed by how many files there are here. All we really need to get started to view our documentation is index.html. So go ahead and right-click on index.html, go to Open in Browser, and choose your favorite browser. All right, so here is Oracle's Java documentation, and here's our point tester and point Javadoc documentation. Looks pretty cool, right? Looks pretty nice. All right, so we've got some classes here. We've got point and point tester. Looks nice. We've got an index here with all of the different identifiers and types in our project, in our names, in our package. So this is really cool, right? We didn't have to do anything with HTML in order to get this up and running. In fact, a lot of these things we didn't even document, right? We didn't document the getters and setters and point, yet they're still showing up here. In fact, the only thing I documented was the point tester class, right? And you can see right here, here's the summary text for point tester, which is pretty cool, right? This came right out of my Javadoc comment right here. Now, let's add a little bit of additional comments to our code and see where they go in the documentation. So I'm going to add a second sentence to my description for point tester. I'm going to add a documentation Javadoc comment for the main method. Note that IntelliJ already detected that an appropriate tag for the main method is @param args. Okay, so I'll put a little description in here, and I'll say this is the main method for the driver program. Some other tags that you might use for methods includes @return. If your return type is void, though, you're not going to use @return because that's implied and no need to describe void. @throws, if your method throws an exception. You can also put an @c in here. You can put an @author in here, but typically author is more file level or class level. Those are just some examples of some things you can put in here. Oh, you can also put in @deprecated too, if in a future version of this code, you're going to remove this method. All right, so let's run this. Okay, now I have a warning. Okay, let's see what the warning is. Scroll up and it says source point tester.java line 28, warning, no description for @param. Okay, so remember earlier I said some tags are very specific about what information they have associated with them. So here @param, it has the name of the parameter, but it also wants to have the name, or excuse me, a string representing the description. So it says right here, @param args tag description is missing. All right, so args stores the incoming command line arguments for the program. That'll get rid of our warning. Looks good. I'm going to head back over to the browser and I'm going to refresh everything. Okay, so let's go to point tester because that's where we've been working. All right, so now under method detail, we see that main has a description. This is the main method for the driver program. And here's the parameters, args, and it says stores the incoming, I have a typo, stores the incoming command line arguments for the program. So this was taken right out of the documentation, the Javadoc. All right. Okay. Now let's see a little bit more about what's going on here. So I've included an author and a version for point tester, but here I am in point tester and I don't see the author and I don't see the version. I see my first line of the Javadoc comment, right? And there's that second sentence that I added. I see my C also, which is really cool, right? I can click on it and it'll take me over to point, but that's not the point. The point is, where's the author and where's the version? Okay, so by default, Javadoc doesn't include everything unless you tell it to via an option or a switch when you execute the Javadoc command. So I'm gonna run this again, but I'm gonna add -author and -version to the end, saying, hey Javadoc, I want you to include the author and the version from the @author and @version tags. I'll refresh this again, head over to point tester, and now look, I have a version and I have an author. Awesome. Looks good. All right, now let's go to point and add a little bit of documentation for point. So I'll say something like the point class represents a point in 2D space. And I could put it in @author and an @version if I want to. Just depends on your preference and your coding standard if you're adhering to one. If you put that in for each class or each file or just maybe the tester class or the driver class. All right, now we haven't seen an example yet of essentially documenting fields we've seen an example of a method and a constructor is like a method, but I'll show you that as well. So let's document this field, X. I'll say X represents the X coordinate of a, say, XY coordinate pair for a 2D space. All we put when we're documenting a field is a description. So here's my description here. I'm going to save this and I'm going to run it, but we're actually going to find that we're not going to see this description show up anywhere. All right, so I'm in point. I see a constructor summary. I see a method summary. I see constructor detail. I see point detail, but I don't see anything about fields. So by default, Javadoc is only looking at your public fields or things that have a public access modifier. So you need to tell it when you execute it what access modifier level you want it to include. So I'm going to include down to the private level so that I can see my fields and I can see this description I just added for the X field. So let's refresh this again. And now we see we have field summary and we have field detail. So under field summary, we see we have int X and Y, and X has a description. So now let's see what the difference is between the summary, whether it's field, constructor, or method, and the detail. Okay, so remember earlier I did something like this is a second sentence or something similar for the point tester class, Javadoc. So I'll run this again. And we're going to see that under field summary, even though I added a second sentence, it's not showing up in the summary. But if I scroll down, it's showing up in the detail. So I just want to emphasize that only the first sentence is considered to be the summary and included here. Now, if I head back to point tester and let's say I hover or I do F1 click on point, I'm going to see a description of point. Okay, so it says the point class represents a point in 2D space. Now, is this the summary or is this the detail, right? So here in point class, right, I have only a single sentence. So let's add a second sentence and head back to point tester, and we'll see that even the quick documentation does the full description, which makes sense, right? Because if we hover over, say, string, right, we see the full description. We don't just see the string class represents character strings, which is the summary description. I'll fix that really quick. Okay, great. So the last thing to show an example of for our Javadoc crash course is documenting a constructor. This is incredibly similar to documenting a method. Javadoc and IntelliJ already recognizes that I have two parameters here. So I'll just put a description on the first line, and I'll call this the explicit value constructor for point. Accepts what's needed for 2D space. Remember, I'm kind of just making this up as I go. All right, now we know that constructors return references to newly created objects, right? But that's implied by a constructor, and we don't actually put @return for a constructor because it's going to fall under the constructor detail or the constructor summary. And because it's a constructor, we know that an object is being constructed and a reference to it is being returned. All right, I have two warnings. We know that it's from X and Y missing a description, but that's fine. Mostly I just want to show you under constructor summary and under constructor detail, we can see the first line here, and we can see all the lines here. And we know we should have a description for our two parameters here and here. The last thing I'll mention is I said earlier towards the beginning of the video that you can sprinkle in and add HTML tags if you want to your Javadoc comments, right? Because I mean, if we look here, we know what's really being generated is HTML files, which our browser can interpret and show us this nice web page. Okay, so I'll just show a quick example of this. There's tons and tons of tags you can use. Some people use paragraph tags to denote their descriptions and breaks in order to denote, new lines in their descriptions and things. My descriptions are very simple, just the minimal working example here, but you can extend them onto the next line if you want, using paragraphs and breaks. Okay, so let's just show a little example. Let's say for fun, I'm going to, I want to syntax highlight int because it's a keyword. So, or I shouldn't say syntax highlight, make it look like code. So I'll use the code tag here and I'll type int and I'll save this and I'll run this one more time. Just as a quick demo of putting HTML tags in your Javadoc comments. All right, so here you can see, I'll zoom in. You can see that the int of ints is slightly different font. So this is from that code HTML tag that I put in here. So there's a lot that can be done with Javadoc. This is just really a starting point. Feel free to check out some of the Oracle Java documentation. So this is pretty comprehensive right here, how to write doc comments for the Javadoc tool. I'd recommend checking this out to read on. All right, so that's the end of the Javadoc crash course. Oh, wait, no, it's not. So I said at the beginning that we were gonna run Javadoc two ways, right? Good thing I caught this. So we've only ran Javadoc from command line. Let me show you how to run it from IntelliJ. All right, so what you're gonna do is go up to the tools menu and then choose generate Javadoc. Let's do it now. Okay, so here's this nice dialog, and this is essentially a graphical user interface to the Javadoc command that we've been using at command line. So it's going to ask, what's the scope to generate Javadoc for, right? Say whole project. This is essentially like us doing the source/star, but you could come in and pick specific files or specific scope. All right, the output directory, this is like the -d, so we do need to specify a directory for our Javadoc to go. So I'm going to navigate over to my top level directory for Javadoc Fun. And I already have a doc folder here, right? We already made it from command line. But if you didn't have this, then you'd have to create it. All right, so I'm going to click doc, open. There it is. Okay, so output directory, here's this slider that I can use in order to decide what I want to include, and I'll include all the way up to private, which is everything. You can leave all these checked for now. So this is kind of the stuff that shows up in the top navigation bar, right? The index, the tree, etc. And then here's the tags that typically aren't included, but you can force to be included. So we did author and version. And then locale, you can specify if you want other command line arguments. If there was something you wanted to add that there wasn't some sort of GUI component for here, you could specify it. And then I'm going to uncheck this box, open generated documentation browser, because I already have it open. All right, so here Javadoc executed again, but this time via IntelliJ invoking Javadoc instead of us invoking it from command line. And I'll just refresh this and everything's still good, other than the fact that I haven't added in my descriptions for X and Y. All right, now I think I am done. Looks like I am. All right, thanks for watching. Hopefully you learned a lot about Javadoc and you know about a resource to continue your learning now that you know the basics of Javadoc.